Hello, and welcome to LURK, the Insomnia Files. If you're awake right now, staring into the dark while the rest of the world sleeps, you're in the right place. Many people listen to these stories to relax. Others listen because sleep refuses to come. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. A bedroom, a car, a quiet house that doesn't feel as empty as it should. If these stories speak to you, make sure you like the video and subscribe. To LURK, the Insomnia Files. Now get comfortable, lower the lights, take a slow breath, and let's open tonight's file. I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. Even writing this feels wrong, like putting the words down somehow makes everything more real. I know how this is going to sound. I know how it will look to anyone reading it. But I don't have a choice. I need to tell someone, even if no one believes me. About a week ago, I was driving home from work like I always do. We live in a small town. The kind of place with long stretches of sidewalk, quiet streets, and enough trees to make everything feel closed in once the sun goes down. People are always out walking or jogging, especially in the evenings. Dog walkers, runners, couples holding hands. In winter, it's even more common because the sun sets ridiculously early. By 5 in the afternoon, it's already dark, and everyone has to get creative just to be seen. I've noticed all kinds of lights over the years. Glowing collars on dogs, LED leashes that change colors, joggers wearing headlamps or reflective vests. Some people even strap lights to their arms or shoes. So when I saw a small light ahead of me that night, bobbing up and down along the sidewalk, it barely registered as anything unusual. Just another jogger out after dark. The light was about 30 yards ahead, rising and falling in a steady rhythm. It looked normal enough at first, but as I got closer, something about it started to feel off. I couldn't have explained why if someone had asked me in that moment. There was just a subtle wrongness to it, like when you hear a song you know well, but one note is slightly out of tune. My brain kept nudging me with the same thought over and over. It doesn't look like it should. I slowed down a little as my car approached him. The street was quiet, no other cars around, just the soft glow of streetlights and that single moving light ahead. And then I passed him. The moment my eyes registered what I was seeing, my entire body locked up. He had no head. There was no helmet, no hood, no shadow hiding his face. There was simply nothing above his shoulders. 1 second I was driving past a jogger, and the next my brain was screaming at me that there was a man running down the sidewalk without a head attached to his body. It happened so fast that I barely had time to process it. By the time the thought fully formed, he was already behind me. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I glanced into the rearview mirror. All I could see was the light, still bobbing steadily, growing smaller as I drove away. It was too dark to make out anything else. As I continued home, my mind went into overdrive, desperately trying to explain what I'd seen. I told myself I must have been mistaken. It was dark. I was tired. Maybe he was wearing a balaclava or some kind of face covering. It had been cold that night. A thick black mask could hide facial features easily in low light. Still, wouldn't I have seen something? Eyes, maybe? A nose? Anything at all? What if it was a costume? A prank? But that made no sense either. It wasn't Halloween. It wasn't even close. And who goes jogging at night in a headless costume? No matter how many explanations I ran through, they all ended the same way. There was no logical reason for a man to be running down the street without a head. So there was no way that's what I had seen. Our brains mess up sometimes. That's what I told myself. They fill in gaps, misread shadows, turn ordinary things into something frightening for just a second. It happens to everyone. A strand of hair floats into your vision, and suddenly you think you've seen someone standing there. A tree stump looks like an animal until your headlights hit it just right. Even as a kid, I remember convincing myself I'd seen Santa Claus because of a shadow in a neighbor's yard, even though I was old enough to know better. By the time I reached my front door, I was almost laughing at myself. I had completely talked myself out of it. At dinner, I mentioned it casually to my husband, trying to make it sound silly before it could sound scary. "I scared myself so bad tonight," I said. "I thought I saw a jogger without a head." He burst out laughing immediately. And when he made a joke about the headless horseman trying to get in shape, he kept going, piling on ridiculous ideas, turning it into something funny. I laughed with him. I wanted it to be funny. I wanted it to be nothing. That was before things got worse. A few nights later, I took our dog, Sadie, out for a walk after work. The air was cold and sharp, and the street was mostly empty. About halfway down the block, I saw it again. A light, bobbing in the distance. My stomach tightened instantly. I told myself not to be stupid. I crossed to the other side of the street to give the jogger space, just like always. But that same wrong feeling crept in, heavier this time. The light moved in the same unsettling way. Too smooth, too steady. I kept walking. I didn't want to look suspicious. I didn't want to confirm my fear. So that's when Sadie started growling. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring straight at the approaching light. Her ears were pinned back, her teeth bared. She had never reacted like that to a person before. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. "It's okay," I whispered, more for myself than for her. I tried to keep walking, but Sadie refused to move. She stood there, tense and rigid, a low growl rumbling in her chest. The light got closer. I pulled out my phone without really thinking, holding it tight, like it could somehow protect me. Then he came into view. I saw his arms first, pale and pumping back and forth with each stride. His shoes hit the pavement in a steady rhythm. The light was strapped to his wrist, flashing and bouncing with each movement. Thump, thump, thump. I stared at the space above his shoulders. My breath caught in my throat. There was nothing there, no shadow, no shape, just empty air where a head should have been. It wasn't a trick of the light this time. It was undeniable. My mind went blank, unable to reconcile what my eyes were seeing. Sadie snarled, pulling hard on the leash. Then he passed me. As he did, I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The muscles at the top of his shoulders moved. The short, smooth stump of his neck flexed, as if he were turning to look at me. I didn't think. I yanked on Sadie's leash and ran. She ran with me, nails scraping against the sidewalk as we sprinted back toward the house. I slammed the door behind us and locked everything, even the deadbolt we almost never used. I screamed for my husband and tried to explain, words tumbling over each other. He called the police. They came. He searched the neighborhood, found nothing. Of course they didn't. We packed up and went to my sister's that night. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't sleep in that house knowing it had been right outside. For 2 nights, I tried to calm myself. But when we went home, I woke at 3 a.m. to a light outside our window. I pulled up the blinds. It was standing there, 6 feet away, headless, motionless. When I looked again, it was gone. Now I'm terrified. I don't know what it wants. I don't know how it thinks, or if it even thinks at all. I just know this isn't in my head. If you ever see a jogger at night and think, just for a second, that they don't have a head, don't explain it away. Run. I was just trying to make the end of summer special. That was all I wanted. One last perfect night before everything changed, before schedules and homework and lockers and growing up started creeping into our lives for real. I wanted laughs, junk food, movies we'd already seen 100 times, and the kind of memories that make you smile years later. What I got was something else entirely. Something none of us will ever forget. Margot, Jenny, and I had been friends for as long as I could remember. We'd met back in kindergarten, when everything was simple, and the scariest thing in the world was being picked last for a game. We'd grown up together, survived scraped knees, bad haircuts, and embarrassing crushes. Now we were about to start 7th grade in just a few days, when we decided to keep our tradition alive with one last big sleepover before summer ended. I went all out. I made pigs in a blanket the way Margot liked them, extra crispy. I bought the exact chips she always grabbed first. I made sure Jenny had her sour, gummy worms, the ones that made her pucker and laugh. I even convinced my mom to buy a huge bottle of Dr. Fizz, even though she complained about the sugar the whole time. Everything was perfect. While I was setting up the movies in my room, I suddenly realized something was missing. Our favorite game wasn't where it was supposed to be. That game had been the highlight of every sleepover for years. We never skipped it. I dropped to my knees and started digging through my closet, pushing aside old backpacks, shoes I'd outgrown, and boxes of random stuff my mom refused to throw away. We loved that game. It had belonged to my mom when she was younger, and somehow it had survived long enough to become ours. We'd played it so many times that I'd lost count of how many times I'd replaced the batteries. It always sat at the top of my closet, right next to my old Barbie travel case. But it wasn't there. I groaned out loud, frustration bubbling up. I didn't want tonight to feel incomplete. After a moment, I figured the only place it could be was the attic. My mom must have put it away without telling me. I pulled down the attic ladder, feeling a little better that it was still daylight. The attic was creepy at night, full of shadows and weird sounds. But during the day, it just felt dusty and cluttered. Climbing up there was like stepping into my mom's memory vault. She kept everything. But old clothes from when my sister and I were little, school projects, boxes of photos, journals, toys, games. My dad called her a pack rat, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. I pushed aside a stack of dresses and found a section filled with old toys and board games. Dolls with tangled hair, broken doll houses, faded boxes covered in dust. I didn't find our usual game. Instead, I found a bunch of others we never played anymore. Some were too childish, some were missing pieces, some just took forever to finish. I was about to give up when I noticed a black box at the very bottom of the stack. I didn't remember ever seeing it before. I carefully pulled it free, wiping off the dust. The letters on the lid were red, faded, and hard to read against the black background. I squinted and slowly sounded them out. Mystery Man. I felt a small thrill of curiosity. I was about to open it when I heard my mom call from downstairs, telling me my friends had arrived. I didn't want to keep them waiting, so I grabbed the box and rushed down. I tossed it onto my bed as I ran past my room, figuring we'd look at it later. The night started exactly the way I'd hoped. We laughed, ate dinner, played outside until it got dark, and then came in to watch movies. My dad worked nights, and my mom was always relaxed about bedtime during sleepovers, so we planned to stay up as late as possible. We wanted to see if we could make it all the way until my dad got home, maybe even until sunrise. We had enough sugar to try. By around 11:30, we were restless. We'd watched 2 movies, eaten most of the snacks, and braided each other's hair while half paying attention to the screen. That's when Jenny asked if we could play our usual game. That's when I remembered the black box. I pulled it out from under my pillow where it had somehow ended up, and my friends immediately leaned in, curious. The box looked old and strange, but exciting in that mysterious way forgotten things often do. When we opened it, we found a board with silver spaces and a bright orange phone in the center. It had a real rotary dial, which felt ancient and cool at the same time. There were cards with descriptions on them, and as we started putting things together, it felt less like a normal board game, and more like we were assembling some kind of police sketch. We'd move around the board, draw cards, and sometimes dial numbers on the phone. Each call gave us information about our own mystery man. Once we thought we had all the details, said we were supposed to dial 000 and describe him. If we were right, we'd win. It sounded strange, but simple enough. At first, it was kind of fun. A little weird, but fun. That changed when Jenny made the first phone call. She struggled with the rotary dial until I showed her how it worked. When someone finally answered, the voice on the other end was crackly and harsh. Whatever it said made Jenny's face go pale. When she hung up, her hands were shaking. She said she wasn't allowed to tell us what the man on the phone had said. That should have been our first sign to stop. It only got worse from there. When Margot took a call, her smile vanished. She didn't look scared like Jenny. She looked angry. As the game went on, every phone call seemed to affect them differently. Jenny got quieter, more withdrawn on the edge of tears, but Margot got sharper, meaner, snapping over small things. When I finally got my own call, the man on the phone told me details about my mystery man in a voice that made my skin crawl. He used words he shouldn't have. He sounded like he was enjoying himself. The game dragged on for hours, growing heavier with every turn. The phone calls became more personal, more threatening. The man seemed to know things he shouldn't. Streets, names, intentions. At one point, the phone rang on its own. None of us had touched it. We just stared at it, frozen, until Jenny picked it up, trembling. She handed it to me when she was done, saying it was for me. That's when he told me the truth. The mystery man wasn't just part of the game. He was coming, whether we finished or not. The only chance of safety was winning. The girls started accusing each other, repeating things the phone man had told them. Lies meant to turn us against one another. I realized that was exactly what he wanted. So I made a decision. We stopped competing. We helped each other. We shared cards. We ignored the phone man's threats. One by one, we finished. Each time someone won, the phone declared them safe. For now. When it was finally my turn, I could hear footsteps in the house. Slow, heavy, getting closer. I rolled and rolled, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The phone rang again and again. I ignored it. I kept playing. I had to finish. When I finally drew the last card I needed, the door to my room began to open. I dialed 000 with shaking fingers and screamed my description into the phone. The voice crackled back, telling me I was safe. The thing in the doorway vanished. We stayed awake until my dad came home, too shaken to sleep. When morning came, I put the game back in the attic and never touched it again. I don't know where it came from. I don't know how it worked. I just know this. If you ever find that game, don't play it. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Just for a moment. If this is your first time here, I invite you to subscribe to LURK, the Insomnia Files. This channel is dedicated to real accounts, disturbing encounters, and unexplained moments shared by people who never expected anything to go wrong until it did. New files are released regularly, usually when most people are asleep. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case when the night feels a little too quiet. Now, back to the story. The story about someone going missing in the forest for 2 weeks always brings my grandmother's experience back to my mind. Growing up, she told it more than once, usually in a quiet voice, usually when the evening had settled in and the house was calm. She never told it to scare us. She told it the way someone tells a memory that still doesn't fully make sense, even after a lifetime of thinking about it. My grandmother was young when it happened, much younger than I am now. She lived in a small village surrounded by forest, the kind of place where trees weren't something special or distant. They were just part of life. The forest wasn't a place you visited for adventure. It was something you walked through every day, like a road or a field. Back then, things were different. People didn't have strict rules about burial grounds the way we do now. In parts of the forest near her village, people had been buried wherever there was space. Some graves were marked with simple stones. Some had rough wooden markers. Others had nothing at all, just a place people remembered. Everyone in the village knew where those spots were. They grew up seeing them, passing them, treating them as part of the landscape. Every morning, my grandmother walked the same path through the forest to get to work. She had done it so many times that she could have walked it with her eyes closed. She knew which tree had the bent trunk, where the ground dipped slightly after the old graves, where the path narrowed before opening again. It was familiar, safe, ordinary. That morning started like any other. The air was cool, the forest quiet, except for birds and the soft sound of her footsteps. She wasn't thinking about anything unusual. She was thinking about her work, about chores, about small everyday worries. Nothing felt wrong when she entered the forest. At some point along the path, though, something shifted. She couldn't say exactly when. There was no sudden noise, no shadow jumping out, no dramatic moment where the forest changed shape. It was more subtle than that, a creeping sense that something wasn't quite right. She realized she had been walking for a long time, longer than usual. The path should have ended by now. She should have been out of the forest, seeing open land, buildings, people. Instead, she was still surrounded by trees. The same trees, the same ground, the same stretch of path. At first, she thought she had misjudged the time. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she'd started daydreaming and lost track of how far she'd gone. She kept walking, confident that the path would straighten out like it always did. But it didn't. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The path never seemed to end. She began to notice something unsettling. She kept passing the same landmarks. A crooked stone near one of the graves, a tree with exposed roots that twisted like fingers. She was sure she had already walked past them before, more than once. Confusion set in. She stopped and turned around, trying to retrace her steps. She walked back the way she thought she had come from. The forest didn't change. The path didn't lead anywhere new. It felt like she was trapped in a loop, walking in circles without realizing it. Fear didn't hit her right away. My grandmother was stubborn by her own admission. She didn't panic easily. Instead, she became determined. If the forest wanted to confuse her, she would outwalk it. She picked a direction and kept going, telling herself that paths don't just go on forever. Eventually, she had to come out somewhere. But the forest seemed endless. The light didn't change the way it should have. Time felt stretched, thin, unreliable. She later said it felt like walking through the same moment over and over again. Her legs grew tired. Her throat felt dry. Still, she refused to stop. That was when she heard the voice. It didn't come from any particular direction. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shouting. It was calm, almost casual, as if someone were standing beside her, speaking normally. It told her that if she wanted to get out alive, she needed to pee. But the words made no sense to her. She stopped walking. Her heart was pounding now, not from exhaustion, but from fear. There was no one there. She was alone on the path. The forest was silent again, like nothing had spoken at all. She argued with herself. Maybe she was hallucinating from fear or fatigue. Maybe stress had finally caught up to her. The idea was ridiculous, embarrassing even. Why would that help? Why would a voice in the forest tell her something like that? But then she noticed something else. The confusion felt heavier when she stood still. The longer she hesitated, the more trapped she felt, like the forest was closing in on her thoughts as much as her body. Desperation took over. She was young, alone, lost, and scared in a place that suddenly didn't follow the rules she understood. The voice hadn't threatened her directly. It hadn't yelled. It had simply stated it like a fact. Do this if you want to get out alive. So she did. She stepped off the path, turned her back to the forest, and did what the voice had told her to do. She later said it was one of the most humiliating and frightening moments of her life, not because of the act itself, but because she felt watched the entire time, even though she couldn't see anyone. The moment she finished, everything changed. The confusion lifted like a fog being pulled away. The forest looked normal again. The path was clear. The trees no longer felt like they were repeating themselves. She could suddenly see where the path led, just a short distance ahead, exactly where it was supposed to be. She stepped back onto the path and walked forward. Within minutes, she was out of the forest. When she emerged, the sun was low in the sky. It was near evening. That alone terrified her more than anything else. She had entered the forest in the morning. What had felt like a short, exhausting stretch of time had actually taken most of the day. People in the village were already worried. Some had started wondering why she hadn't shown up to work. No one had gone looking for her yet because no one imagined she could get lost on a path she'd walked her entire life. She never went into detail about what she told them when she got back. She said people listened, nodded, and quietly told her not to talk about it too much. In those days, stories like that weren't questioned the way they are now. People accepted that there were things in the world that didn't behave the way they should. My grandmother never took that path the same way again. She still walked through the forest because she had to, but she avoided that exact stretch whenever possible. And she never ignored her instincts after that day. When she told the story, she always ended it the same way. She didn't try to explain what happened. She didn't claim it was a ghost or a spirit or something evil. She just said the forest didn't want her there anymore, and for reasons she never understood, it decided to let her go. Even now, thinking about it makes my skin prickle. Not because of the voice or the strange instruction, but because of how easily she disappeared without actually going anywhere. One familiar path, one ordinary morning, and suddenly, the rules stopped working. That's the part that stays with me the most. How close it was. How simple. For how it didn't require 2 weeks, lost in the wilderness or some dramatic survival story. Just confusion, stubbornness, and a forest that decided to keep someone for a while. And how sometimes the way out isn't logical at all. There's this one place I still think about sometimes, even though I don't live in that city anymore. It's not famous, not marked on any map, not something tourists would ever notice. Just a strange, random set of stone steps carved into the side of a massive slab of rock, spiraling upward for maybe 10 feet before stopping abruptly. No platform, no railing, no sign explaining why it's there, just steps that lead to nowhere. It sits close to a parking area, maybe 200 or 300 feet away at most, close enough that you'd think people would wander over to it out of curiosity. But they don't. Almost everyone avoids it. Even people who know the area well tend to keep their distance, like there's an unspoken agreement that whatever that thing is, it's better left alone. At the time, I used to ride my bike along a trail near there, and usually around dusk. There were 2 parking areas connected by this stretch of trail, and beyond that it linked up with the MKT trail. It was one of my favorite routes. Quiet, shaded, peaceful. The kind of place where the light fades slowly and everything turns blue and gray before night really settles in. That's when I started noticing them. At first it didn't register as anything strange. When you're riding at dusk, your eyes play tricks on you. Shadows stretch. Shapes blur together. So when I saw someone walking up the side of the rock, I just assumed it was another hiker, maybe someone exploring or killing time before dark. Sometimes, instead of climbing, there would be someone standing at the top of the steps, just standing there, silhouetted against the dimming sky, not moving much, not waving or looking around, just there. For a while I didn't question it. People do weird things in parks. Maybe they liked the view, maybe it was a shortcut, maybe it was just some local hangout spot I didn't know about. But after weeks of riding that same trail, something started to bother me. It was always the same 2 people. Not the same clothes, not the same posture exactly, but the same silhouettes. One slightly taller, one a bit shorter. I never saw them together, ever. It was always one or the other, either someone climbing the steps or someone standing at the top. Never both at the same time. That alone was strange. But what really got under my skin was something else. I never not once saw anyone walking to the stairs, and I never saw anyone walking away from them. No one approached from the trail. No one descended the steps. They just appeared already on them, or already at the top, every single time. I'd pass through on my bike, see one of them, ride on, loop back later, and sometimes the other silhouette would be there instead. Same height, same general shape, still no movement to or from the structure. I've always been interested in paranormal stuff. Ghost stories, unexplained places, that kind of thing. I've even had a couple of strange experiences myself over the years, things I can't fully explain. But this felt different. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was subtle, persistent, like something repeating the same motion over and over again. That's what made it creepier than anything else. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I'm not exactly known for making smart decisions when something weird catches my attention. I kept telling myself it was probably nothing, a trick of light, my brain pattern matching where it shouldn't. 2 different people who just happened to look similar at dusk. Still, I wanted answers. One evening, I decided I'd finally approach the stairs, not in a confrontational way. I just wanted to ask. I wanted to know why the same person was always there, why I never saw them leave. I figured once I talked to them, the whole thing would lose its mystery, and I'd feel stupid forever being scared. I parked my bike nearby and walked toward the rock. As I got closer, that familiar unease started creeping in, the kind that makes your shoulders tense and your breathing shallow without you realizing it. I told myself to relax. It was just nerves. I pulled out my phone to check the time, partly to distract myself, partly because I had a text come in. I answered it quickly while walking. When I looked up again, I was right at the base of the stairs, and the person was gone. There was no sound of footsteps, no movement, no shadow slipping away, just empty stone steps carved into the rock. I stood there for a second, confused, my heart starting to beat faster. Then I saw something else. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement at the top. The silhouette that had been standing there moments before stepped backward into what looked like an opening in the rock. Not a doorway exactly, more like a dark gap that shouldn't have been there. When I turned my head fully to look, there was nothing, just solid stone. That was it. That was the moment my brain stopped trying to be rational. Every instinct I had screamed at me to get away. I didn't think about my bike. I didn't think about how stupid it was to run when riding would have been faster. I just ran. I sprinted back toward my car like something was right behind me, even though I never heard footsteps, never felt a hand on my shoulder, never saw anything chasing me. I didn't stop until I was inside, doors locked, breathing hard, hands shaking. I didn't go back after that. A day or two later, I told a buddy about what I'd seen. I tried to downplay it, but he could tell it had rattled me. He's the kind of guy who doesn't scare easily, so of course he decided to check it out himself. In broad daylight. He went to the same spot, climbed up the steps, stood at the top, and looked around. When he came back, he told me something that only made things worse. There was no opening, no hole, no gap, or no hidden space in the rock. Nothing that someone could step into, not without being very obviously visible. He said the steps weren't even really stairs in the normal sense. They were more like a specific rock formation that someone had chiseled into the slab long ago. Rough, uneven, decorative maybe, or symbolic. Definitely not an entrance. That was the last confirmation I needed to know something wasn't right about that place. I never went back. A few months later, I moved out of the city altogether. Life moved on. New routines, new places, new distractions. But that image stuck with me. Two silhouettes, always the same, always climbing or standing, never arriving, never leaving. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't looked at my phone that night, if I'd kept my eyes on the stairs the whole time, and if I would have seen where that person actually went. And sometimes, late at night, I'm glad I didn't. It was one my mom told more than once, usually when the road was especially dark and quiet. She grew up far out in the country, long before there were streetlights or paved roads everywhere. Back then, being out in the country really meant something. Neighbors were miles apart. Woods stretched on forever. At night, darkness wasn't something you could ignore. It pressed in on you from all sides. When she was young, her family lived in a house surrounded by fields and forest. It wasn't unusual for relatives to stay with them for long periods of time. One summer, her cousin came to live with them. He was a few years older than her, old enough to roam around on his own, and he loved fishing more than anything. He had a favorite fishing hole tucked away deep in the woods. It wasn't marked on any map. It was just something he'd found on his own, a quiet spot where the water was calm and the fish were plentiful. He went there all the time, always taking the same narrow trail through the trees. He knew that path like the back of his hand. He could walk it without thinking. One evening, he stayed out there longer than he meant to. The fish were biting, and he kept telling himself he'd leave after just one more cast. By the time he finally packed up and started heading home, the sun was already sinking low in the sky. The forest was filling with shadows, and the light was fading fast. At first, he wasn't worried. He'd walked that trail countless times, even at dusk. He knew where it twisted, where it narrowed, where roots crossed the dirt. But as he went deeper into the woods, it grew darker than he expected, and the trees blocked what little light remained, and soon he could barely make out the path beneath his feet. That's when he heard it. Footsteps. At first he thought it was his imagination. The woods are full of sounds, especially at night. Leaves shift, branches creak, animals move through the underbrush. He told himself it was probably just something small, following the same trail. But then he noticed the rhythm. Every time he took a step, the sound came again, just behind him. When he slowed down, it slowed down. When he stopped completely, the footsteps stopped too. He stood there in the dark, heart pounding, listening. The forest went quiet. No insects, no birds, just his own breathing, loud in his ears. After a moment, he took another step forward. So did whatever was behind him. Fear hit him all at once, sharp and overwhelming. Hey, this wasn't an animal. Animals don't do that. They don't copy you. They don't follow in perfect sync. He tried to tell himself it could be someone else walking the trail, maybe another fisherman heading home late. But he knew better. No one else used that path. And even if someone did, why wouldn't they say something? He started walking faster. The footsteps kept pace with him. His chest tightened, and his mouth went dry. Panic crept in, making his thoughts race. He didn't want to look back. Something deep inside him warned against it. He focused on the path ahead, on getting home, on the glow of the house lights that had to be waiting somewhere beyond the trees. Then he broke into a run. The footsteps ran too. Now they were louder, closer, almost right on top of him. His breath burned in his lungs, and his legs ached. But he didn't slow down. Branches whipped at his arms as he ran, barely able to see where he was going. Ahead of him, he spotted a tree with a low-hanging branch stretching out over the trail. An idea flashed through his mind, born of pure desperation. If something was following him, he wanted to see it. He needed to know what it was. As he reached the tree, he jumped as hard as he could, grabbing the branch and hauling himself up. He pulled his legs up tight, clinging there in the darkness, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps didn't stop. He heard them rush forward, passing directly beneath him. He could hear the movement clearly, the sound of something running full speed down the trail. But he never saw anything, no shape, no shadow. Nothing broke through the darkness below him. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds faded away into the distance. He didn't wait. He dropped from the tree and took off running in a different direction, crashing through brush and branches, no longer caring about the path. His heart was hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Even as he ran, he was convinced the footsteps were back, right behind him again, just out of reach. He didn't slow down until he reached the edge of the clearing near the house. Lights shone through the windows. Familiar shapes emerged from the dark. He burst through the screen door so fast it slammed against the wall. His feet tangled, and he fell hard onto the floor in front of everyone sitting in the living room. He was gasping for air, chest heaving, face pale. He tried to speak, but no words came out. The adults rushed to him, asking what was wrong, what had happened, where he'd been. For a long moment, all he could do was breathe. When he finally calmed enough to talk, he told them everything. The footsteps, the running, the tree, how close it felt, how sure he was that something had chased him all the way home. They searched for explanations. They went outside. They checked the trail the next day in daylight. They found nothing, no signs of anyone else. No tracks, no reason for what had happened. They never figured out what it was. When my mom finished telling that story, the car would always feel a little quieter. The darkness outside the windows seemed thicker somehow, like it was listening. As a kid, I remember gripping the seat a little tighter, imagining footsteps just beyond the reach of the headlights, keeping pace with us on the road. When I finally asked her what she thought it was, she never gave a clear answer. She just said some things don't need to be seen to be real, and some places, especially out in the country, don't belong entirely to us once the sun goes down. Even now, that story still unsettles me. Not because of monsters or ghosts or anything you can point to and name, but because of how familiar it all sounds. The way fear crept in slowly, the way something followed without ever showing itself, the way it ended right at the doorstep, as if whatever it was couldn't cross that final boundary. And every time I hear stories like the ones people share online, stories about footsteps in the woods or something unseen pacing them in the dark, I think about my mom's cousin, about that trail, about the sound of something running just behind you, close enough to hear, but never close enough to see. Sometimes, not knowing what it was is the scariest part. I grew up in Northern California, and when I say northern, I mean the kind of north where it almost feels like you've already crossed into Oregon. Dense forests, long empty roads, small towns where everyone knows everyone, and huge stretches of land where you can go for miles without seeing another person. If you grew up there and didn't just move in recently, chances are you have at least one strange story connected to the woods. Almost everyone does. It's just one of those places where odd things seem normal until you really stop and think about them. I was around 19 or 20 at the time, right in that phase where you feel completely free for the first time. No one telling you what to do, no curfews that actually mattered, no real responsibilities yet. I was loving every second of it. I wanted experiences. I wanted stories. I wanted to see weird things and feel that rush of fear that comes with doing something slightly reckless. That's when I heard about the cave. Someone I knew mentioned this super rad graffiti painting hidden deep inside a cave system about 40 minutes away from town. The way they described it made it sound legendary, like something you had to earn by going far enough where most people wouldn't bother. That alone was enough to hook me. I've always been drawn to things that are strange, unsettling, or just a little bit wrong. The idea of something hidden underground, far from normal paths, scratched that itch perfectly. So I gathered 3 friends, threw together a loose plan, and we decided to go. We weren't just going for a quick look. We planned to be gone at least overnight, maybe longer if things went well. There we packed backpacks with what we thought we'd need. Headlamps, extra flashlights, water, rope, snacks. We felt prepared, confident, maybe a little too confident. The caves themselves weren't new to us. All of us had been there before, at least partially. They're lava caves, not the kind carved into mountains or cliff sides, but tunnels formed beneath the ground long ago. From the outside, the area looks empty and dull, just brush, low plants, and that fine, dusty dirt that gets everywhere and never fully leaves your car, no matter how much you clean it. The first section of the caves is almost friendly, if that makes sense. Beginner level. The ceilings are higher, parts of the roof have collapsed over time, creating skylights where sunlight spills in. You can walk through without much trouble. You don't even really need a flashlight during the day. The tunnels aren't very long, and they don't feel claustrophobic yet. It's easy to think you understand the place after going through that part. When you exit the western end of the last easy cave, you step into a strange clearing. Technically, you're still inside the cave system, but the ceiling has completely fallen away. The sky opens up above you, bright and wide. Around the edges are thick, thorny bushes that hide the opening to the deeper section on the other side. It feels like a threshold, though at the time we didn't think of it that way. We pushed on. None of us had ever gone beyond that point before. This was new territory for all of us, and that added to the excitement. We adjusted our packs, turned on our headlamps, joked around, and ducked into the darker opening, hidden by the brush. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed a change. It wasn't immediate panic, not yet. It was more like a subtle shift, a weight settling in my chest. The air felt different, heavier, thicker. This part of the cave was completely underground, with no natural light and barely any airflow. Breathing took just a little more effort, enough that you noticed it but didn't think too much about it. At the time, it didn't seem alarming. It felt like what you'd expect from being deep underground. So we kept going. We climbed over large boulders and squeezed through narrow crevices. Looking back now, I know my dad would absolutely lose his mind if he knew the kind of risks we were taking. One bad slip, one wrong step, and someone could have broken a leg or worse. But we were young and felt invincible. We laughed, called out to each other, made jokes that echoed strangely off the stone walls. As we moved deeper, the space around us slowly changed. The ceilings dropped lower, the tunnels narrowed. What started as walking turned into crouching, then scrambling. At some points we were hunched over, moving almost on all fours, using our hands to steady ourselves on the rocks. Our voices sounded different down there, smaller somehow, swallowed quickly by the darkness. I started to feel a little disappointed. We'd been going for a while, and there was no sign of the graffiti, no splash of color on the stone, no marker to say we'd found what we came for. I was starting to think maybe the story was exaggerated, or maybe we'd taken the wrong route. We began talking about turning back. That's when it happened. I was standing on a boulder, getting ready to climb down onto another one just below it. It was an easy movement, nothing risky. I hopped down and straightened up. The moment I did, everything changed. The heaviness I'd felt before transformed into something else entirely. Something sharp, something overwhelming. It hit all of us at once. The joking stopped instantly. The cave went silent except for our breathing. My heart slammed into my throat so hard, it felt like it might choke me. My body flooded with adrenaline. Every nerve was screaming. It was the most intense fight-or-flight response I have ever experienced in my life. There was no thought process, no clear image, no voice telling me what was wrong. Just absolute certainty. Certainty that we were not supposed to be there. Just certainty that something knew we were there. Certainty that if we stayed even a second longer, something terrible was going to happen. It felt like we had disturbed something. Not in a dramatic movie monster way, but in a deep, instinctual way. Like stepping into a space that belonged to something else. Something ancient and aware. I'd never felt fear like that before, and I haven't felt anything quite like it since. None of us needed to say a word. We turned and ran. Getting out was chaos. We scrambled over rocks, slid down surfaces we'd carefully climbed earlier, nearly tripping over each other in our rush. Headlamps bounced wildly, throwing shadows that made everything feel even more unreal. We didn't care about being careful anymore. We just needed to get out. Somehow, we made it back through the tunnels without anyone getting seriously hurt. When we burst out into the open air, it felt like breaking the surface after being underwater too long. I gulped in air like I'd been holding my breath for minutes. We didn't camp. We didn't talk about staying. We didn't even really talk at all. We got into my car and drove away as fast as we reasonably could, tires kicking up that fine dust as we left the area behind. No one made jokes on the drive back. No one tried to explain what had happened. The radio stayed off. The silence felt heavy, but somehow safer than speaking. After that night, we never discussed it. Not really. Not in detail. Not the feeling. Not the exact moment it hit. Not the certainty that had gripped all of us at the same time. It was like an unspoken agreement. Whatever it was, we didn't want to give it more attention by trying to name it. To this day, I refuse to go back to those caves. I don't care how curious I am, or how many people tell me there's nothing there. I trust that feeling more than any explanation someone could offer. Some places don't need a monster, or a ghost, or a clear reason to be dangerous. Sometimes your body knows before your mind ever catches up. And sometimes, leaving without answers is the smartest thing you can do. A few years back, there was a story that spread through our area and stayed there, the kind that doesn't just pass through the news cycle and disappear. People kept talking about it long after the headlines faded. Even now, when something strange comes up in conversation, someone eventually brings it up again, lowering their voice without really meaning to. It was about a pair of siblings. According to the local news, they had gone missing when they were very young. Not teenagers who ran away, not adults who chose to disappear, but children, small enough that they couldn't survive long on their own. Their disappearance had devastated their family and unsettled the community. Searches were carried out, people volunteered, names were called out again and again, trails were walked, fields were checked, forests were combed through. Yet nothing came of it. Years passed. Hope slowly thinned, as it usually does in cases like that. Eventually, the siblings were no longer described as missing children. They became part of the long list of unresolved losses, stories people remembered with a shake of the head and a quiet sense of grief. Then, years later, something happened that no one expected. The siblings were found alive. They were discovered in another town, far from where they had originally gone missing. Not hidden away or held captive in a basement, not living under false identities in some obvious way. They were grown up, adults, living lives that, on the surface, didn't immediately scream, abduction case. When the news broke, it felt unreal. People didn't believe it at first. Cases like that don't usually end that way. Children who vanish for years don't simply reappear as adults somewhere else. There are usually bodies, or confessions, or at least some explanation that fits into a familiar shape. This one didn't. When the siblings were finally questioned, when officials and reporters tried to piece together what had happened to them, the story they told made everyone deeply uncomfortable. They said they had been taken by a big black man. That exact description appeared in every report. It wasn't poetic language. It wasn't metaphorical. It was how they described him, every time, without variation. Big, black, man. Not just tall or strong, but imposing in a way that went beyond physical size. A presence, more than a person. They said he appeared suddenly when they were children. One moment they were in a place they recognized. The next moment, they weren't. There was no long struggle, no clear memory of being carried off kicking and screaming. It was more like being led away, drawn into something they didn't understand. The strangest part came when they talked about the search efforts. They said they could see the people looking for them. They remembered hearing their own names being shouted, voices filled with panic and desperation. They remembered seeing familiar faces, sometimes so close they could have reached out and touched them. Family members, villagers, search parties passing right by them. but they couldn't interact with any of them. They said it was like being trapped behind glass. They could see everything, hear everything, but their bodies wouldn't respond. Their voices wouldn't carry. No matter how much they screamed, no sound came out. Yeah, no matter how hard they tried to run toward their family, their legs wouldn't move in that direction, and the big black man was always there. As long as he was with them, this separation existed. The world they had known was visible, but unreachable. When he was near, the rules were different. The siblings said they understood this instinctively, even as children, without anyone explaining it to them. They knew they couldn't escape. They knew no one could see them. Eventually, the searching faded. Voices stopped calling their names. The familiar faces disappeared, and the world they were left in became the only world they knew. When elders in our community heard this part of the story, they didn't react with shock the way outsiders did. They didn't laugh or immediately dismiss it. Instead, many of them went quiet. Some nodded. Some exchanged looks that said more than words ever could. My grandparents were among those people. When I asked them about it, expecting them to brush it off as nonsense or exaggeration, they surprised me. They told me that stories like this were not new, not here, not in our land. Long before Christianity reached our region, before churches and missionaries and written records reshaped how people explained the world, stories like this were common. They weren't told as fairy tales. They were warnings, accounts, things that had happened to real people. According to my grandparents, people used to get spirited away like this while doing ordinary tasks. Hunting, working on farms, collecting firewood, walking familiar paths they had walked all their lives. Sometimes it happened in forests, sometimes in open fields, and sometimes near rivers or hills. One moment they were there, the next they were not. Sometimes those people were never seen again. Their families searched until hope ran out, and their names became part of old conversations and quiet mourning. Other times, people returned. Days later, weeks later, years later. Sometimes much farther away than should have been possible. What terrified people most was the timing. Someone would vanish in the morning and reappear by evening in a place that would normally take days to reach on foot. Or they would be gone for years, only to come back having aged strangely, unable to fully explain where they had been or how time had passed for them. The details in these stories often matched, even when told by people from different villages who had never met each other. And one of the most disturbing details was food. People who returned would talk about being fed. At the time, they said the food tasted incredible, rich, filling, comforting, like the best meal they had ever eaten. They remembered feeling satisfied, even grateful. But when they were found, when they were back among their own people and able to think clearly again, they realized what they had actually been eating. Worms, rotten tree bark, things that should have made them sick, things no one would willingly eat unless they were starving beyond reason. The siblings said the same thing. During their time with the big black man, they never felt hungry in the way hunger normally feels. When they were fed, they believed they were eating meat. Chicken, pork, sometimes stewed dishes they recognized from their childhood. Only later, after they were found and grounded again in the normal world, did the memories shift. The taste faded, replaced by the horrifying realization of what the food had really been. They said they never would have eaten it if they had known. But while they were there, it felt right, necessary, even good. That detail unsettled me more than almost anything else. My grandparents said this was always part of the stories. Whatever took people altered their perception, not just of time or place, but of reality itself. Things were not what they seemed. and those taken couldn't tell the difference until it was over. And then there was the figure himself, the big, black man. According to my grandparents, this description appears again and again in old stories. Always similar, always consistent. A tall, dark figure. Sometimes described as wearing something like clothes, sometimes not. Sometimes with features that seemed human at first glance, but wrong the longer you looked. He was rarely described as violent in the way people expect. He didn't usually attack. He didn't need to. His power came from control, from the fact that once you were with him, you were no longer fully part of this world. People said he guided them, watched them, sometimes spoke to them, sometimes didn't. Sometimes he seemed almost indifferent, like a farmer checking livestock, rather than a predator hunting prey. The siblings said he wasn't cruel, exactly. But he wasn't kind either. He simply was. An authority they couldn't challenge. A presence that shaped everything around them. When they tried to explain where they lived during those years, their descriptions were vague and unsettling. It wasn't a prison. It wasn't a village. It wasn't a forest exactly, though trees were involved. It was more like a place that borrowed pieces from the real world, but didn't follow its rules. They aged there. They learned things. They grew up. But parts of their memory were missing, like pages torn out of a book. They couldn't account for all the years. Time didn't move the same way. What finally allowed them to return was never made completely clear. Even they didn't seem to know. One day the big black man was gone. Or maybe he allowed them to leave. Or maybe they simply slipped back when something changed. They found themselves in a town they didn't recognize, but one that existed in the normal world. They were seen. They were touched. They could speak and be heard again. Slowly, with help, their identities were confirmed. When asked where they had been all those years, they told the truth as best they could. Most people didn't know what to do with that truth. Some dismissed it as trauma-induced delusion. Others blamed cults, criminals, psychological conditioning. But those explanations never fully fit. Too many details lined up with stories that had existed long before modern psychology or organized crime. My grandparents told me that in the old days, people were careful about certain places, not because they believed in monsters in a childish way, but because they understood boundaries, certain forests, certain hills, certain times of day. There were rules, spoken and unspoken, about where you went and when. Christianity, modernization, and outside influence slowly eroded those beliefs. And people were told those stories were superstition, that there was nothing to fear, that the world was simple and explainable. But the land didn't change just because the stories stopped being told. When my grandparents finished talking, they didn't sound frightened. They sounded resigned, like people who had seen enough of life to accept that not everything fits neatly into the boxes we want to put it in. They said the siblings were lucky, lucky to come back, lucky to still remember who they were, lucky that whatever took them eventually let them go. I live in a tribal state in northeastern India, and stories like this don't feel as distant here as they might elsewhere. The forests are old. The land holds memory. There are places where people still lower their voices without knowing why, where paths feel wrong, even in daylight. And when I think about those siblings, what haunts me most isn't the idea of a big black man as a single being. It's the idea that there are forces woven into the world that don't care about our explanations, our religions, or our disbelief. That sometimes people can be standing right next to you, calling your name, and you will never hear them answer back. And that sometimes being taken doesn't mean being dragged away screaming. Sometimes it means stepping just slightly out of reach of the world, and not even realizing you've crossed a line until it's far too late. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you. They stayed. Every file you heard tonight was shared by real people. Real fear, real uncertainty, real moments where something felt wrong, or almost did. And the most disturbing part, most of these stories don't end with answers. They end with silence, with questions, with the feeling that whatever was there might still be. If you want to keep exploring the cases that don't let go, subscribe to LURK, the Insomnia Files. There are many more files waiting, and not all of them close before it's too late.